It might be just while at home, or working from home, or being at home. So a little bit about my background and why I'm here and leading this webinar in particular. I lead an organization called Eat, Breathe, Thrive, and our mission is to prevent and help people overcome eating disorders. So I've been working with mental health and our relationship with food pretty much my whole career. I've worked with lots of people that deal with everything from under eating and restrictive eating disorders like anorexia to overeating and more binge type disorders like binge eating disorder, and then everything in between, from over exercising to bulimia to just not feeling good in our bodies, which is a fairly common human experience. And then I can also speak a little bit from personal experience. I had an eating disorder when I was a young person in my late teens. And so I come at it both from a professional angle and a personal angle. And then last but not least, I've worked in research and academia for a long time. Well, not a long time. That was where I got my start of my career, and I now do studies on our programs. So I come at this from a lot of different angles, from a heart angle, from a mind angle. And my hope is, in watching this webinar and being here today, or watching from home, wherever you are, you will get some really, really practical tools that you can apply to your own experience. The first thing I wanted to talk about is what we mean by emotional eating. So what is emotional eating? How do you even define that? I define emotional eating as eating to change a feeling state. It's a pretty simple definition. And one thing I would mention with that definition is that there's no connotation of good or bad in it. So I think a lot of us hear emotional eating and we immediately go, oh, that's bad, or that's disordered or pathological. Really, we all eat kind of all the time to change a feeling state, even if that feeling state is I'm hungry and it's unpleasant and I want to eat to feel better. So emotional eating isn't always bad. And to some extent, there's an emotional dimension to eating anytime we eat, either because we're eating to make a feeling of hunger, which might be mildly unpleasant, go away, or because we're eating for pleasure, like a really delicious piece of chocolate or piece of cake. So we might be eating with a desire for pleasure. And I guess the other thing I'd say with this is that it's not only fairly common, everybody eats emotionally to some extent. And part of that is we all have to eat every day, multiple times a day. And food itself changes our neurobiology. So it has effects on our on all of our reward systems. And we've been primed to do that so that we continue to eat. So if you're watching this and thinking, oh, I really have problems with this, just remember you're not alone, and it's fairly normal. That doesn't mean that it can't be problematic, but it's a fairly common experience, and it's pretty hard to get through life without this. The other thing I would mention, because I'm recording this webinar from the middle of a pandemic, is that emotional eating can sometimes become more problematic for us when we're in the midst of stress and when there's a lot of chaos going on. And I would start by humanizing that. That's pretty normal, just because when we're really stressed out, we want to feel better. That's a normal human reaction to stress and anxiety and fear. And I would also acknowledge that in many places in the world right now, people are at home. And so they're at home and they might have your kids around or your family around, or it might be the opposite. You're at home by yourself and you're missing human connection. And so we might be dealing with more stress and anxiety than normal just by being at home. Add on the stress of being in the middle of a pandemic, or having a lot of unknowns going on in the wider world and how that applies to our own life. And we've got a refrigerator, a pantry full of food that's right there, that has a potential to change our feeling state. So this is a totally normal reaction to stress. Um, Having said all of that, I think that part of our work in our relationship with food and having a healthy relationship or a more compassionate relationship with food. And I guess what I mean by that is how we are with food, having a compassionate relationship with ourselves and how we are with food. Um, is knowing when those behaviors have gotten problematic and they're not serving us, and when it's just a time to kind of let go and just go, you know what, I it's I'm really feeling anxious right now, and I'm gonna have a piece of chocolate because it makes me feel a little bit better. So that's part of our work. I wanted to give you a really wonderful tool today that I've developed just through years of working with people with eating disorders in treatment centers and clinical settings, that can help you figure out, am I really hungry right now, or am I feeling something that would be better served by another activity, whether that's a meditation or a yoga practice like you've probably been learning in HealthFlix. This is not a practice or a tool to figure out, should I eat or should I not eat? But it is a really wonderful tool to figure out, am I feeling a sense of physical hunger in my body, or is there a sense of emotional need or desire that might be served by other things? And that doesn't mean you're not allowed to eat. It just might mean you eat and you go, oh, I'm also feeling really anxious, or I'm also feeling a need for human connection, or I'm also feeling a need for rest. So I'm going to use a whiteboard function here and go through this tool in the best way I can in a digital scenario. So bear with me. Let's just make sure that the whiteboard comes up. Okay, I see a whiteboard and I'm hoping you will too. So I'm going to draw, that was a red line. It's a strong color for this. Let's change it to a black line. Black line right down the center of the whiteboard. And on one side, I'm going to write the word physical. And on the other side, emotional. This chart is what I use to take an inventory to figure out, am I hungry right now? Am I having a physical need for food? Or am I emotionally hungry right now? Is it a combination of both? And I use a series of questions. I'm going to call out the questions and give them to you. So if you're taking notes at home, the questions are a really good thing to write down. But I'm going to write down myself some of the answers to the questions. So that's just a note for those of you who are taking notes at home. So the first question I would invite you to give yourself, if you're in a place where you're maybe wanting to go toward the refrigerator, or finding yourself already at the refrigerator and going, am I actually hungry right now? Is food gonna, is food what I'm needing, or is it something else? Is, where do I feel sensation in my body? Where do I feel sensation in my body? When I ask clients that are dealing with eating disorders this, where do you feel physical hunger in your body? Sometimes they don't know, but generally they know that physical hunger generally involves sensations in the belly. So physical hunger usually doesn't show up in your ear, usually doesn't show up in your big toe. It usually shows up in your belly, and it might feel like sensations of movement. Might feel like sensations of grumbling. It might be pangs, or so hunger pangs, or a little bit of pain or unease, but generally the sensations show up in the belly. So the first question to ask, if you're in this inventory of, am I really hungry right now, is, where do I feel it in my body? Where do I feel sensation in my body? The next question I'd have you ask yourself, sticking with that question, the other side of this question is, where do you feel emotional hunger in your body? Or where do you feel emotional needs in your body? This is a bit of a more difficult one to answer, I think, partially because some of us don't have the somatic awareness to know where we feel emotions in our body. And then I guess the other thing to acknowledge is that it's far more subtle. It's not It's not as obvious as a grumble in the stomach. One thing I've found is that emotional hunger can often show up in the chest, and it can often show up, I guess I'll say before I move to the other place, it can show up in the chest. And some theories about this among dietitians and nutritionists that are trained in neuroscience is that it may be because we've got a big nerve called the vagus nerve that goes straight down from the throat through the chest. And so there's some question of whether that might have to do with why. So for those of you who are science nerds, that might be a theory behind why we often associate emotion with the heart or the chest, or heart pain, heartache, right? Another place that emotional hunger can show up, and this is a really big cue for the clients I work with that deal with binge eating disorder or bulimia, is in the mouth, actually. That might be surprising, but clients I work with often say it shows up as a need to chew or taste. Like there's just a feeling in the mouth of something wanting to be satisfied. It's really, really subtle, but it might be a good check-in for you to check in with yourself. When I'm feeling a lot, and when I'm not feeling anything in my belly, and I'm feeling a lot and wanting to reach toward food, or even substances like alcohol or smoking, where am I feeling these things in my body? So chest and mouth is a good place to look. Another question that can be really helpful in this inventory is, does the timing make sense? Does the timing make sense? So one of the really lovely things about physical hunger is that it has fairly predictable and consistent timing. And what I mean by that is, generally when you wake up in the morning, you may or may not be hungry right away, but usually you are hungry if you didn't eat overnight within a few hours. That varies for some people more than others, and it might vary based on when you had your last meal the night before, but usually you're hungry within a few hours. And then if you have a fairly decent sized meal that's got a good balance of fats and proteins and carbs, usually you're hungry again within 3, 4, maybe 5, but within 3 to 4.5 hours. And that has to do with how quickly or slowly our digestive system processes food. Now, if you just had a banana, it might be an hour later that you're hungry again, but there is some consistency to it. So, and that has to do with hormones in our body called leptin and ghrelin, which are hunger and fullness hormones, but there's timing to it. Our body has cycles that are consistent and fairly predictable. There are things that can interfere with it, but there's a fairly predictable and consistent timing. So the question to ask yourself is, does the timing make sense? If I just had a big, I don't know, steak dinner, and it's been an hour, and I'm going toward the refrigerator again and opening it and looking inside and catching myself, does the timing make sense? Would this be a time that physical hunger would sensibly show up? With emotional hunger, I find, oh, I forgot to write that one down. So fairly predictable and consistent timing. Now, with emotional hunger, I find that the timing tends to be more random and more sporadic. So again, it can be that I've had a fairly decent dinner and it's been an hour or 2 hours, and those creeping feelings of loneliness are showing up, or I've just looked at the news cycle and I'm like, oh my gosh, when is this lockdown going to end? Everything's so unknown. Am I going to be able to keep my business? All those questions come up. And then I find myself in the pantry or in front of the fridge. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just had dinner an hour or 2 hours ago. So this tends to have more random and sporadic timing, which is a good indication for me that there may be an emotional state that's driving my desire to reach toward food, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm not allowed to eat, but it does mean those emotions might need to be dealt with in other ways. Another great question to ask yourself is, how specific is the craving, or how specific is the desire for food? This is actually a question I got from a client I was working with in an eating disorder treatment center once, who'd been dealing with binge eating disorder for years. And I remember when he said it, he said, well, he said, physical hunger, he said emotional hunger tends to be very specific. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, physical hunger can be very specific as well. You know, sometimes you have, you know, you're deficient in vitamin C, and so you want oranges or clementines. So my head was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. But the question he told me, and it's always stuck with me, he said, the question I ask myself is, would I eat an apple right now? Would an apple do? And what he said is, if it's an emotional craving, an apple doesn't sound good at all, even though he likes apples. So he says his physical hunger is generally open to variety. So when he is physically hungry, he is willing to eat multiple different foods because he's hungry, and it's an unpleasant feeling. And so he's like, okay, I might prefer to have one food or another. I certainly have food preferences. I might really be craving Chinese food tonight, but I'm willing to eat lots of different things because I'm truly hungry. He said for him, emotional cravings tend to be highly specific, at least with the type of food. So he was saying that usually an apple won't do, even though he likes apples, and he goes more toward classically comfort foods when he's dealing with something like anxiety or depression. So I thought that was a really, really wonderful thing that I've shared over and over again, that question of how specific is the craving, and would any food do, or would most foods do, or is it really, really specific? Another one, and this might seem obvious, but it can be so, so helpful in the moment, is does the feeling, does the desire to eat, does the craving go away when you eat? I'll say that one more time. Does the craving go away when you eat? So this again might seem obvious, but it can be a really big aha in the middle of it. I find that physical hunger is usually what I call proportionately satiable. And what I mean by that is, if I'm really, really hungry, as I start eating, it might take a little while for the desire to eat to go away, but it eventually starts to go away. It eventually starts to be satisfied by food. If I'm only a little bit hungry, I might eat something and it immediately goes away. This again has to do a little bit with the timing of those hunger and fullness hormones. But usually as I start to eat, when I'm physically hungry, the desire to eat goes away. So the thing I always write down is that physical hunger is proportionately satiable. So it can be satiated, or it can be satisfied. Now, emotional hunger, on the other hand, has this funny quality of being fairly insatiable, or very difficult to satiate with food. So when I'm having a real emotional craving, or really big emotional states, and I'm eating, I find that the desire to eat doesn't respond to the food, probably because the desire is for something more than just food. So emotional hunger can have an insatiable quality. The example I always give when I'm working with clients is that I once found myself at a Super Bowl party and feeling a lot of social anxiety. And I remember I was standing there next to the stack table, and this is going to make me sound really American. So I was at the Super Bowl party having a talk with someone, feeling really anxious, and I was eating, and I started to notice that I had a stomach ache. And my my hand kept going back to the table, and I started to realize that I was getting a stomach ache because I was over full. But that desire to keep reaching down and eating food wasn't going away. In fact, it was just getting stronger as I was there. And I just had a funny moment of thinking, you know, even though I teach this, I am right in the middle of it right now. I'm reaching toward food because it makes me feel better, like slightly, but that anxiety isn't going away, and there may be something else I need to do in this moment to deal with the anxiety. Food might not be the best way to deal with it. Another question that especially people that deal with emotional eating at maybe an eating disorder level or a disordered eating level might be familiar with is, do you, and I guess this is everybody really, now that I think about it, but the question is, do you want to hide what you're eating from others? And again, this is one of those things that sort of makes me laugh a little bit. I find that emotional hunger has this funny quality of going, I'll just wait till everybody goes to bed and then I'll go get it. And there's no reason or rhyme for that. It just is this funny quality of really wanting to live in isolation and secrecy. And I wonder if that might be because there are feelings of shame around the emotional state, or feelings of, yeah, shame or guilt around the actual emotional state. But I do find that emotional hunger tends to create an urge to eat in isolation and secrecy, whereas I find that, at least for me, when I'm physically hungry, I could care less if somebody watches me eat or sees me eat. It's like I need to eat. I mean, I might prefer to have my lunch in private some days, but I find that physical hunger, I'm open to being seen. I don't mind so much. And sometimes a full-blown eating disorder can make all eating feel really shameful and secretive. But for, I guess, if you clear that eating disorder out of the way, beneath that um, is some of these indicators. Another one, and it might be, it might feel fairly obvious, but it's a good question to ask yourself, is, are you aware of any intense or uncomfortable emotions? Are you aware of any intense or uncomfortable emotions? So I find that physical hunger, while it can have a sense of urgency behind it, especially if I've been ignoring it for a few minutes or a few hours, it's more likely to have a fairly neutral, although sometimes urgent, emotional tone. And this is another one that I got from that client at this eating disorder treatment center. Just put usually. Emotional hunger often arises in response to intense feelings, and often intense negative feelings. So sadness, fear, anger, or loneliness, or just sometimes even mildly unpleasant feelings. And this might be true for you while we're in lockdown. It could just be a state of boredom, which can feel unpleasant and we want to get out of. I also had that client I was talking about once told me that he had really intense states of giddiness. So when he was reaching toward food from an emotional hunger standpoint, he often had a feeling like, oh, like he would say it was like I was about to get a drug or something. It was really, really strong, intense giddiness, excitement, which might have been sort of a feeling of I'm about to get a reward. So I'll just put here, while the emotions can be different, sometimes it's intense or unpleasant emotions. Okay. The final one for this chart that I'll offer is that the question is there a misplaced sense of urgency, or how quickly or slowly did the feeling of hunger come on? So one thing to be aware of is that often physical hunger, while some of us are not as aware of this and could work on this, usually it develops gradually and progressively. And what I mean by that is, usually we don't become ravenously hungry out of nowhere. Often our body will give us some softer, quieter signals first. So it might be a rumble in the tummy, or a little bit of hunger pangs or some movement. And then if we don't do anything, it might, 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes later, come back with some clearer hunger pains or a feeling of burning in the top of the stomach. And then if we keep ignoring it, we might get that full body almost hunger that's got a very, very strong sense of urgency that needs to be satiated right then. But that whole process happens fairly gradually and progressively. Sometimes emotional hunger can come on very suddenly. And often it demands to be satisfied immediately. And you can think of this really with any craving. I think it's true of food, and especially for people that struggle with their relationship with food, but it's also true of any type of substance abuse issue. So often these cravings that are driven by emotion come on really suddenly, and it's like, I can't wait, I need it right now. So if it ever has that, if I'm ever having a moment where I'm like, I need it right now and I can't wait, and it hasn't slowly built to that point, as I'm reflecting on that question of how did this feeling develop? It might be a good indicator or a good um, flag that there might be an emotional component to the feeling. Okay, so that's my inventory. I'll go over those questions one more time. So where do you feel it in your body? Does the timing make sense? How specific is the craving? Um, does the craving go away when you eat? Open to being seen. Do you want to hide what you are eating from others? And then finally, uh, gradually and progressively, is there a misplaced sense of urgency, or how did the feeling of hunger develop? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share so you can see me again. Here I am. I'm back. So I hope that was helpful. I think the one piece that I wanted to add before we open it up for questions, and please feel free to drop any questions into the chat, is that all of this is really mental and heady, and sometimes in the midst of it, it's hard to connect our brain with our body and with our somatic experience. And so before we end and before we go to questions, I wanted to give you a really short meditation, an interoceptive meditation, which is just a big word for feeling what's happening inside of the body, that you can practice at home. And I find this meditation works really well before meals. And really well after meals, if you're struggling with a question of, am I really full, or am I still hungry? Do I need to eat some more? So this can be a great meditation you can do yourself. You can do this meditation with kids. We use it with adolescents all the time to help build one's ability to sense when you're really hungry and when you're full, which seems like a really basic thing, but you wouldn't believe how many of us struggle with this. So for this meditation, if you're practicing at home, I want to invite you to come into what feels like a really grounded position. So I'm not going to do this now because I'm on the webinar, but if I was at home, I would lay down on my back and put my feet on the ground. So really come fully onto under the ground, under the earth. So I'll give you a minute now to get settled. If you're at home, I suggest laying down on your back and putting your feet on the ground. And if you're not in a position that allows for that, or even your body doesn't allow you to get up and down off the floor, you can also do this meditation as I'm doing now, just seated in a chair. And then if you can, bring both feet onto the ground. And if your feet don't reach the ground, you could place blocks underneath your feet, or just ground your feet into whatever's available. You can allow your eyes to stay open or turn your gaze inward by closing your eyes. Either is a possibility. And then whether your eyes are open or closed, I want you to bring your awareness inside and to your breath. So with the next breath you take, I just want you to notice the feeling of breathing. So you might notice the air as it comes in through your nostrils. And then notice the feeling of the air going out. Do that again. Take a deep breath in through your nose. And a long breath out. You can open your mouth or just sigh it out through the nose as well. Keep breathing like that. deep breath in through the nose. You might even allow the navel to rise as you breathe. And then long breath out. And this next one, breathe in really deeply and allow the belly to inflate almost like you're blowing up a balloon. Really breathe in, allow the belly button to come up or out. And then as you exhale, just let all the air go. Keep breathing like that, really deep breaths in and out. And then as you breathe, especially as you inhale, take your attention to your belly, to your tummy. You might go ahead and just place one hand on top of the navel and one hand just below the navel. And notice the feeling of your hands on your tummy. You might feel warmth, feeling of heaviness if you're lying down. Take another deep breath in and really inflate the belly as you breathe, full belly breath. And then take another long breath out. So keep breathing. And as you breathe, almost like your awareness was a flashlight, I want you to take that flashlight into your body and into your belly and begin to shine it around and just notice what you feel. There might be feelings of movement, a flutter, or a grumble. Might be feelings of ache or tightness or fullness. And you might not be feeling anything at all right now. That's totally okay. Just keep breathing really deeply into the belly and notice what you feel. With this next inhale, see if you can breathe in a little more deeply, fully inflating the belly, allowing the navel to rise. And then with this exhale, really let all the air out of the lungs, completely releasing and letting go. Breathe again. Inhale, full breath in, allowing the belly to rise. A long breath out, allowing the navel to fall. Final part of this meditation is to come back to the sensations in the belly. So tune in, notice what you're feeling, notice if the feeling state has changed. And ask yourself, is there anything my body is needing right now? Another way to ask it is, what needs might those sensations be pointing to? What might my body be needing right now? Sometimes if there's pain or tenderness, there's a need for comfort or soothing. Sometimes there's a really clear need for food or nourishment with hunger pangs or movement or grumbling. And sometimes there's no needs at all. It's just a feeling of satisfaction, of quiet. Keep breathing really deeply into your belly. Check back in with the sensations. Without having to figure it out, just see if anything shows up. Is there anything you're needing right now? Okay, we're going to take 3 more breaths here at the end. So even if it's been hard to breathe deeply this whole time, you can get 3 in at the very end. So we'll do it together. Let all the breath out first. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Fully inhale, inhale, inhale. Let the navel rise. And a long breath out. Do that again. Breathe in, breathe in, breathe in. Breathe in a little bit more. And a long breath out. Final time. Take a deep breath in as deeply as you can this time. Breathe in, breathe in, breathe in. A little bit more and hold. And long breath out. Okay, if you are seated, if you're laying down, can take some movement. If you're seated, actually you can take some movement as well. It's nice to move the limbs around, shoulders, wrists, ankles, neck. And then if you're here with us online live right now, I welcome your questions, your comments. I've left a little bit of time here at the end. Really hope this can be practically useful. And if you feel a bit shy, know that there may be someone at home that doesn't have the opportunity to ask right now. So I'd be so grateful for questions. Just taking a look at our chat and our Q&A. Give folks a little bit longer just in case they're laying on the ground. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions yet. I will tell you that that meditation that you just did, we did actually just 2 parts of a 4-part meditation. You can actually download it. Oh, yay, glad. Thanks for the things in chat, guys. You can download that meditation for free on our website. It's at eatbreathethrive.org, eatbreathethrive.org. And it's actually taught by a lovely, lovely English woman. So it's so relaxing. It's so nice to hear it. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we have an app as well with that meditation. You can have it with the ocean behind it. I haven't used that app in forever, but it's just the Eat, Breathe, Thrive app. So you can grab that. That inventory is on the app and it's a free app totally. So you can use that. Yay, I'm seeing some questions come in. And then I think the last thing I'll say about that meditation is that there is, if you're a professional and you want to offer it to clients, I believe there's a free download that totally goes through the entire meditation. It's just a great meditation for tracking hunger and fullness. I'm seeing a question. The question is, if we understand that we have emotional cravings, what do you advise to do? Not eat at all or eat something healthy? That is a great question. And I'm always so careful about teaching this because I think, again, sometimes people hear emotional and they go, wait a minute, I'm having an emotional craving. This means I'm not allowed to eat. And that's not it at all. I deal with people with all types of eating disorders, including restricting eating disorders. So I don't want to convey that. I would advise that if you're recognizing that there's an emotional craving, that you be with yourself in that. Maybe do that meditation. And sometimes if we're just still for a bit, we start to get a sense when we ask that question of what am I needing or what is my body needing? Sometimes we'll get a sense of I'm needing comfort, or I'm needing human contact. I'm feeling lonely and I need to call it a friend, or I'm needing ease. I'm in pain, right? Or I'm needing something to do because I'm bored. So I suggest really, really staying with that question of what am I needing? And sometimes I'll acknowledge, I'm like, I don't know what I'm needing. I'm just in an unpleasant feeling state. So can you eat? For sure. The thing I always say when you're coming to that is, if you're going to eat, don't expect the food to address the emotional feeling. So yes, you're totally welcome to eat, but I wouldn't go to ice cream thinking it's going to meet your need for human connection. So that's a choice you've got to make. And also to hold, if I'm already full, is eating going to cause me harm? meaning, am I going to put myself into a more uncomfortable state by eating? So that's something to sit with. And you can always try eating and try eating a little bit and seeing how it changes the feeling state. And sometimes this is a messy process. We go, okay, well, I tried eating last time and I actually felt worse. So maybe I'm going to try something different. Um, the other thing I'd say about that question is just that if you're in that place of, I know I'm having an emotional craving and I'm not sure what it is I'm needing, practice. You've got tons of yoga available through HealthFlix and then also online. Doing a practice that calms your nervous system and helps take you from that anxious state to a more restorative parasympathetic state might allow you a little more space to figure out what the need is. So sometimes we're in that state of being wired and anxious, and we can't even access the wisdom of what am I needing right now. So try a practice, whether it's walking outside in the sunlight or doing a gentle yoga practice that puts you in a state of rest and digest, and then come back to that question of what I'm really needing. I'm also seeing a question, do you work with clients who are active in eating disorders? Yes, we do. Typically we've got programs that, we've got a curriculum, a 7-week curriculum that's run in treatment centers by trained facilitators, and sometimes it's run as a 3-week curriculum. So those are for people with active full-blown eating disorders. Right now, because of the pandemic and because so many people don't have access to treatment and have had to leave residential treatment programs that have closed their door, we have a 4-week online program called Yoga for Eating Disorder Recovery that runs once a month for 1 night a week. Very gentle yoga, and it's really designed to give people in eating disorder recovery tools to support recovery, to calm the nervous system, to tune into hunger and fullness signals. So that's available, and you can find that on our website, eatbreathethrive.org. The course is totally online, and we have scholarships available too if you're out of work at the moment or struggling financially, which so many people are. How do I explain how I feel when eating emotionally to a partner who wants me to restrict what I eat? Oh dear. Wow, that's a really difficult question. I don't think that partners should be dictating what anyone eats. So I mean, I'm a very, I suppose I'm a type A person. I would shut down that conversation. I don't know all of the nuances. So I certainly wouldn't want you, if this is an abusive relationship, to put yourself into a place of harm. But it's not up to anybody else to tell you what you're able to eat. And so, uh, yeah, but I guess the other thing I'd say is that how do I explain how I feel when eating emotionally to a partner who wants me to restrict what I eat? I would speak to how harmful that can be, that someone is asking you to restrict what you eat, and how unloving. That's not very kind at all. Um, and also remember, you may not have to explain how you feel. Just the fact that someone's asking you to restrict what you eat tells me that it may be very difficult for them to come to a place of empathy and understanding. Although I don't know, it's so hard to answer a question like that in a webinar. So I guess I'll just acknowledge that I don't know the details of that situation, but that's a red flag to me. I would hope no one's telling you to restrict what you eat. I'm having super cravings that really feels like a drug addiction. Sometimes I take all the sugar off my diet for months, feeling so incredibly good. But then I always have a weak moment where I try a little bit of chocolate thinking it's okay. And then I'm back to a bad habit, eating lots of sugar, a little bit or all or nothing. How can I ease that and learn to enjoy it a little? Do I have any tips? My big tip there, even in reading your question, is kindness towards self-compassion. So sometimes sometimes the biggest problem isn't actually the emotional eating, but how we are with ourselves in our relationship with food. So what I mean by that is sometimes the biggest problem isn't how we're eating, but it's how we're talking to ourselves about how we're eating. So gentleness and kindness with self. I almost sometimes think of like if thinking about yourself like a young kid, like a 4 or 5-year-old, and if you yell at that 4 or 5-year-old and say like, oh, you've done it again, now you're back on your chocolate habit, and can't I ever blah blah blah, can't you ever just have one piece? That 4 or 5-year-old might shut down. And I'm not implying that you're a 4 or 5-year-old, but if there's a lesson there, that coming at it with compassion and understanding and kindness and going, wow, you must be really, really stressed out right now. And the chocolate or the sugar must really be bringing some ease into a painful experience. That might help to shift the dynamic a little bit. Because sometimes when that compassion can come in, um, we're not so much on a roller coaster with it. There's an exercise I teach that I wish I could teach you right now. We've got 2 minutes left on self-compassion. But a good book that I would recommend to come at that is a book called by Tara Brach. I don't actually, it's Radical Acceptance or something along those lines. Anything by Tara Brach. But yeah, how can I help that ease and learn to enjoy it a little? Yeah, and then I think the other thing would say is be gentle with yourself. I eat chocolate all the time, and it's not because I'm physically hungry for chocolate. It's just because I like it, and it's okay. And you're human, and you're allowed to feel pleasure, and you're allowed to do all of that. So with self-compassion, maybe you can give yourself a little break with how you're feeling and the behaviors, but also maybe develop the self-compassion to not continue harming yourself if that's what's happening. Oh, really great and rich questions. All. Thank you so much. It's 11:45 and I've been told that I need to end on 11:45 for the next speaker, but you're welcome. You're more than welcome to get in touch through the website, eatbreathethrive.org, and we've got online courses going all the time. So if you're at home and dealing with this, I feel like we could deliver a lot more in that capacity. But thank you for being here. And yeah, I hope to see you all in another venue.